My mother secretly tried to arrange the adoption of my newborn son behind my back, because she believed my baby's arrival would overshadow my sister's upcoming wedding. So I ended up taking legal action, and now she's been found guilty. My sister is set to be married toward the end of this year, and I gave birth to my little boy roughly 3 weeks ago. Everyone was thrilled about the new addition, except for my mother, and I wasn't the least bit shocked by that since she's always acted like nothing in the world matters more than my younger sister, her precious girl. My sister and I have never shared a close bond, mainly because she's been incredibly spoiled her entire life. After my dad passed away a few years ago, my sister and I pretty much stopped talking altogether. The only reason I kept a relationship with my mom after my father's death was because I'd promised him I'd look out for her, knowing my sister likely wouldn't step up for anything. She was not the responsible type, so my dad made me vow to stay by my mom's side. Even though it was plain as day that my sister was my mother's favorite, I still tried extremely hard to maintain at least some semblance of a connection with mom, right up until recently, when she showed up on my doorstep announcing my sister's engagement and her upcoming wedding. I initially assumed mom had dropped by just to share the wonderful news, but she went on to say that because I was having a baby during the same year my sister was getting married, I was bound to steal my sister's spotlight. Her logic was that giving birth was a bigger milestone than a wedding, which I couldn't wrap my head around. I reminded her that people wouldn't skip my sister's wedding just because I had a newborn, and it's not like I'd even be invited to the ceremony. After all, my sister and I aren't close, and we haven't exactly exchanged invitations for any major life events. There was zero chance I could overshadow her wedding if I wasn't going to be there in the first place, and I'm no famous celebrity who would have people chattering away about my baby at her event. In short, I thought those points would be enough to calm my mother's nerves, but she countered by urging me to keep my pregnancy and my baby hidden from our entire extended family and any friends we have in common, all because she was terrified my sister wouldn't get her moment in the limelight. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The conversation spiraled into a massive argument, and after that, I stopped talking to her. I felt guilty for breaking my promise to my dad, but my mom's demands were too outrageous, and I was too far along in my pregnancy to deal with her absurd behavior. I was cranky and tired, my hormones were all over the place, and I simply had no patience for that kind of nonsense. She wasn't there for any part of my pregnancy after our falling out, and I managed just fine with my husband and his side of the family. Even on the day I gave birth, my husband tried calling her to let her know, but she refused to come to the hospital, since she was busy doing something with my sister. I wasn't even remotely surprised. Her priorities have always been crystal clear. If she thinks that me having a child would threaten my sister's limelight, then there's truly nothing left to say. So, for all these reasons, there had been absolutely no contact between us until a couple of days ago, when Mom started blowing up my phone with texts begging me to answer. She said there was something urgent she needed to discuss. I almost ignored her, but then I remembered my promise to my dad and reluctantly answered the phone. That's when I learned she was facing legal trouble, because she tried to put my baby up for adoption without my consent. She'd approached an adoption agency using fake documents, claiming she was my son's legal guardian and had power of attorney. According to what she told them, my husband and I were drug addicts, who'd been deemed unfit by a court to raise our own child, which gave her supposed custody rights. The agency saw through her scam when they figured out the paperwork she'd provided was fabricated, and they shut down her adoption attempt immediately. Not only did they halt everything, they planned on pressing charges against her for fraud and false representation. Realizing how bad it looked for her, my mother called me in a panic, asking for my help and sounding absolutely terrified, but I couldn't wrap my head around her audacity. How could she possibly expect me to rescue her after she did something so vile and horrifying? If her aim was really just to keep all the focus on my sister, trying to secretly give away my child was an unbelievably vile way of doing it. As far as I was concerned, she earned every bit of the trouble coming her way. And ironically enough, she brought me even more attention through this scandal, because now I was determined to take her to court myself. I hung up the phone on her once she was done explaining, because there was nothing left to discuss. I felt zero sympathy for her. I actually believed she deserved a punishment even more severe than what was looming. A short while later, I heard from the adoption agency, and they officially informed me of what she'd attempted. Naturally, after talking everything through with my husband and hearing from the agency, we both made the decision that we had to press charges as well. We found a lawyer straight away, and in just a few days, we filed a civil lawsuit. Given the serious nature of what she did, there were already criminal charges against her, and it seemed likely there wouldn't be much room for any negotiation. The best option she might have is a plea bargain, or to settle out of court, but it still won't save her from possible jail time. At this point, she's under house arrest, but she can still send messages, which she's been doing non-stop. Her emails are full of desperate pleas for my mercy and frantic apologies. She keeps saying she only acted that way out of some irrational rage at me for refusing to hide my pregnancy. Now she realizes how messed up the whole thing was, but she's begging me to help anyway. So far, I've been ignoring her messages. But she dug deep yesterday, and used the one thing she knew would make me stop short. She brought up my father's dying wish, the one I made in private to him, that I would always look out for her. She told me I was breaking that sacred promise. I had no idea she even knew about that promise, so it startled me, but after thinking about it, it was clear she was just manipulating me. I have no doubt my father never meant for me to stand by her while she tried to commit fraud and take away my child without my knowledge or consent. I have decided not to drop my lawsuit against her. She cornered herself into this situation, and if my lawsuit feels like a betrayal of my father's wish, I believe Dad would understand I have no choice. He would likely forgive me if he were still around, considering how extreme her actions have been. People have criticized me for staying in touch with Mom for as long as I did, given her blatant favoritism toward my sister and her utter lack of concern for me. But losing a parent changes everything. My father's deathbed request weighed heavily on me. He made me swear to look after my mom, so I took that oath seriously for a couple of years. Still, this has crossed a line that I can't ignore. It's pure emotional manipulation for her to use my father against me, and it's incredibly distasteful on her part. Even my husband firmly supports my decision to move ahead with legal action. I'm not even asking for a huge sum of money. I simply want her to pay back the expenses I've covered on her behalf in the past few years, since my sister wouldn't spend a dime on our mother. My sister pretty much only ever takes care of herself, which is probably why my father asked me to make that promise in the first place. I'm certain he couldn't have imagined things would turn out like this. Either way, I need to do this not only for myself, but also for my child. Financially, I'm not putting her on the street. My dad left her the family home and a decent bank account, so she can survive. Plus, she has a brother, my uncle, who is definitely in a position to help her out. If, by some wild chance, she does lose everything to this lawsuit, it's no longer my concern. I've given her every chance to show some sense of responsibility, and that never happened. I'm done trying to be the daughter she apparently never wanted. Now, my only priority is being a good mother to my own child. It's been a few weeks since that decision, and currently, the mediation stage is underway. Everybody wants to settle our civil lawsuit out of court. But it's not going smoothly. Every mediation session ends prematurely, because my mom starts getting overly emotional, shouting and sobbing until the meeting can't continue. I can't tell if she's putting on a show or if she's genuinely falling apart, but either way, it's causing delays that don't help her. My uncle has also been in touch, pressuring me to drop this. He accuses me of demanding an unreasonably large settlement. He keeps reminding me that Mom raised me from the time I was a helpless infant, and now here I am, refusing to forgive one little mistake. He doesn't seem to grasp that filing fraudulent documents and nearly giving my baby away to strangers is not just some trivial slip-up. She practically had to plan it out in advance. There's no way this was a spur-of-the-moment mishap. What if the adoption agency had fallen for her lies? I could have lost my baby. That thought horrifies me, and it makes me less inclined to show any leniency. In fact, the settlement amount I'm requesting only covers the money I've spent on her over these past few years, not a penny more. My uncle doesn't know that's all I'm asking for, and once I revealed it, he still called it excessive. I started to get angry. Until now, I hadn't wanted to damage my relationship with him, because he'd never harmed me directly. But he was persistent, so I snapped and told him that if he's so concerned about his sister, maybe he should cough up the money to pay me back himself, so we could settle everything. He got furious, hurled insults at me, and at that point, there was no point continuing the call. I don't understand how anyone can defend my mother after seeing the magnitude of what she tried to do. Meanwhile, my sister has been infuriating. She's painting me as the bad guy, running around telling everyone I'm just out for revenge, because she and Mom never gave me enough attention. Apparently, she's ranting to all our relatives and acquaintances, stirring up drama, so the entire family knows about the lawsuit. My preference was to keep this private and avoid having to explain myself, because the circumstances are disturbing and humiliating. But since she's been so vocal, multiple relatives have started asking me questions. I'm only answering to clear the air, especially since some of them might need to testify if this goes to court. So I'm telling myself it's better to get it all out now instead of later. The real problem is the story my sister is spinning. She's twisting it into some petty sibling squabble, as though I'm just venting a lifetime's worth of bitterness through legal means. She obviously doesn't comprehend the severity of our mother's crimes, or she just doesn't care. It's bewildering how self-absorbed she can be, but I'm not exactly surprised. She takes after our mother in more ways than one. Oddly enough, the whole fiasco started with Mom wanting my sister's wedding to be a grand, show-stopping event, overshadowing everything else that year. And now she's unleashed a massive scandal that will forever be the talk of the family. My sister's wedding can't even hope to compete with the drama and gossip surrounding Mom's attempted fraudulent adoption. It's almost poetic in a strange way. Not too long ago, my mother finally agreed to the terms we set, and we're going to receive the settlement money. She's still dealing with the criminal charges, and she and her lawyer are scrambling to avoid jail time. As far as I know, she's stuck with a pretty grim outlook, legally speaking. I've been asked to testify by the prosecution, along with the staff from the adoption agency, so we'll see how that unfolds. My sister, and possibly some other family members, may be called to testify too. Over the past couple of weeks, my little family has tried to make the best of things. We managed to slip away for a short weekend trip so my son could meet his great-grandparents, my husband's grandparents, actually, since mine have passed on. Spending time with them was wonderful, and they reassured me I was doing the right thing by standing up for my child. I confided in them about the guilt I've been harboring over breaking my promise to my father, but they insisted I have nothing to be ashamed of. They said he would have likely told me to defend my child no matter what, and hearing that gave me a huge sense of relief. I honestly needed that little getaway, because this situation has been so draining. Even though Mom and I have clashed before, things never hit such an extreme low. Lately, in mediation with our lawyers present, she's been calmer, probably because she realized her meltdowns weren't helping her case, and she'd risk an even worse outcome if we ended up in court. She hardly looks at me now. Whenever she does glance in my direction, she looks away immediately, like she can't bear to acknowledge me. Part of me thinks she's finally aware that she has no right to face me anymore. My uncle and my sister continue spreading negative stories about me within the family, but I truly don't care. Those who support me will do so no matter what. The others are merely on the sidelines, hungry for rumors. That poses no threat to me, and as long as I have my husband and child, I'm perfectly fine. It's been more than a month since that last update, and we eventually received our settlement money a few weeks ago. My husband and I decided to set it aside for our son's future. We don't need to spend it immediately, and it feels right to keep it safe for him. My sister, upon discovering this, unexpectedly turned up at my house and started raising her voice at me, complaining that Mom had pledged to pay for a portion of her wedding expenses. Now that I've taken legal action and reclaimed what I was owed, Mom can't foot that part of the bill. Somehow, my sister pinned the blame on me. It was absurd. She literally admitted out loud that it was my money to begin with, yet she still seemed furious that Mom no longer had access to it. She was ranting right at my doorstep, because I refused to let her inside. The moment she started shouting, I slammed the door in her face, because I wasn't about to put up with that barrage of nonsense. I've been juggling working from home while on maternity leave, plus caring for a newborn, so I don't have time for her tantrums. She refused to leave even after I shut the door, and kept yelling for a while. Ultimately, I got fed up and decided to call the police. They arrived in a couple of minutes, and while they were escorting her away, she unleashed a stream of vicious insults and threats aimed at me and my child. It was loud enough that neighbors, who'd probably been peeking from behind their curtains, actually stepped outside to watch. It was mortifying, and some of the things she said made me feel deeply uneasy. As soon as she was gone, I phoned my husband, who came home early, and told him about her threats. One of the officers had advised me to consider taking out a restraining order against her, because what she said was genuinely concerning. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how easily she could contact me or show up whenever she wanted. She knows where we live, she has my personal information, and if she's determined to freak me out, it wouldn't be difficult. I'm not saying she's actually going to carry out her menacing words, but even without violence, she could attempt other forms of intimidation. And I'm a parent now. I have to prioritize my son's safety and well-being. After long discussions with my husband, we agreed that moving would be our next step. I was already planning to change my phone number and email addresses to cut off random family members who only want to dig for gossip. It's exhausting to have people popping up out of nowhere, fishing for details about this drama. That's one more reason I'm thrilled at the idea of relocating. Of course, hiring lawyers, paying for everything a newborn requires, and planning a move is all incredibly expensive. Money has been tight, but for my child's security, it's worth it. I'm exhausted, but my husband and my baby are the reason I can handle so much right now. I feel incredibly fortunate to have found a partner who understands me so well, and I'm thankful his family is wonderful and has supported me all this time. It strikes me that ever since my dad died, my in-laws have shown me more compassion than my own mother ever has. And I know not everyone is lucky enough to have that kind of supportive extended family. I just hope this whole mess reaches its conclusion soon. Finally, the verdict for my mother's criminal trial came in last week, and she was found guilty across the board. Because this is her first offense, her punishment includes a hefty fine, which serves as restitution for both the adoption agency and for me, plus many hours of community service. She narrowly avoided going to jail, but she does have to undergo court-ordered mental health treatment in a rehabilitation facility. Her lawyer argued that she's been dealing with some psychological issues, so that's likely why she dodged actual incarceration. I learned all of this from a few relatives. I haven't been talking to my mother since she agreed to the settlement in our civil lawsuit. I think it's fair enough that she's being made to address her mental well-being, and at least there's a legal record of her wrongdoing. Meanwhile, I also successfully got a restraining order against my sister, so that's another small victory. We're in the middle of our moving process, which is chaotic, but I can handle it, especially now that we know there's some incoming money from the restitution. We probably won't have to ask my in-laws for any financial help, and we won't have to dip into the settlement fund we set aside for our son, which is a huge relief. In a strange twist, Mom may have managed to avoid jail time, but her personal life is in shambles. Word has spread quickly. My sister has gone on social media publicly condemning what happened, claiming she knew nothing about it until very recently. She's essentially throwing Mom under the bus, saying she fully supports Mom's conviction, because she considers her actions reprehensible. This is the same sister who, just a short while ago, was entirely on Mom's side. But apparently, her fiancé and his parents threatened to postpone the wedding because they wanted no part in a scandal of this magnitude. To salvage her own image, she publicly denounced Mom, which is kind of ironic, given how Mom's always put her above everything else. Mom spent her life prioritizing my sister's happiness, and now she's been discarded the second it suited my sister's interests. It's a rather harsh reality for my mother, but I can't muster any sympathy. As for me, once I'm settled into my new place, I intend to cut off all ties with them and live my life in peace. I'm eager to leave this entire chapter behind, and the thought of moving forward without them is the biggest relief I've felt in a long time.